Good morning. For those of you who don't know us, we're Chad and Danielle Barnes. Pastor Henry has asked us to speak about our missions experience in Taiwan and our adoption story.
I remember talking with Chad and some friends about missions when we were first married. I thought missions was a good idea. However, there was one place I never wanted to go: China. From what I read about China, it was all about smuggling in Bibles and then going to jail when you got caught. And I wasn't too into going to jail, so I remember saying that I would never go to China. Well, my perception about China all those years ago was probably a bit misguided, but I was strong in my belief all the same. However, I was soon to learn that you should never tell God never.
As far back as I remember, I was always drawn to adventure. As a teenager, I would often discuss the possibility of overseas missions with one of my buddies. At Bible summer camp one year, I remember hearing the guest speaker talk about his mission experience to China and how there was a need at that time of getting printed Bibles into China. My buddy and I simultaneously looked at each other and exchanged glances. The speaker now completely had our attention.
At the end of our third year of marriage, Chad and I learned that the company he was working for was shutting down, and he would be out of a job. Because this company employed a large number of people in the town we were working in, the school I was working for wasn't sure if they would have a position for me. So they told me that I could wait and see if they had enough students to offer me a position for the next year, or that they would understand if I went and looked elsewhere. So we prayed that God would lead us in the right direction and show us clearly where he wanted us to be. I began doing internet searches for jobs in Alberta. But every time a posting for a teaching position in Taiwan came up, I ignored it for about 2 weeks. Then I started getting this feeling that I should look at it. Was God putting this here for a reason? I didn't know where Taiwan was or anything about it at all. And I certainly didn't know it was right beside China. But after a couple of weeks, I got curious and I clicked on the link. And it was for an ESL position at a school in southern Taiwan. They were interviewing interested candidates the next week. I showed the posting to Chad, and he suggested I call the number just to inquire. So I called and talked to the man about the job, and within minutes, I had an interview set up for the next week.
So the next week, we were off to Red Deer for this interview. We met a man who led us into a small conference room, and he interviewed both of us. He was very impressed with Danielle and offered us a 1-year contract. Thing was, they wanted us to start in 6 weeks. They actually wanted us to start in 3 weeks, but we said we needed a little more time. I was so thrilled. I was heading to Asia, although I really wasn't too sure where in Asia Taiwan was. We accepted the offer and drove home wondering what we had just gotten ourselves into, but we were very excited. Telling our families that we had 6 weeks to pack all of our stuff into storage, and watching the reactions was quite priceless.
Our first year in Taiwan was fun, full of adventure and new experiences, but it was also full of sadness, fear, and bewilderment. I missed my family terribly. I think I cried every night for the first 3 months. I had a hard time with the new smells and food and sights and language. When we went out, the only thing I could order was chicken, and that was because I went like this. But actually, that's not universal sign language. Some people did not know what I was doing. So it was a time of desperately holding on to God and seeking him for strength and comfort.
I can't share all the same feelings of being nervous as Danielle. Actually, after the first month in Taiwan, I realized I was actually living like a dream. I was in a giant amusement park called Adventureland. And our second day in Taiwan, I purchased a 125cc scooter. I soon got to experience this freedom of driving on a scooter and weaving in and out of traffic, going on sidewalks, and getting wherever I needed to go a lot faster than in a car. This would never fly in Canada, I often found myself thinking. I approached everything as an adventure. A simple shopping trip to Costco turned into an adventure when we had to figure out how to fit $250 worth of groceries and 2 adult Waiguo Rens on a scooter to get across town. I had a strong desire to learn Chinese, and I viewed this as another adventure. Danielle and I quickly signed up for Chinese lessons. I knew that this would help us with just living in Taiwan, with banking, getting food. I found our Chinese language classes much harder than Danielle did. Maybe her French background was helping her, or maybe it was just a male-female thing. Either way, Danielle was able to grasp the language way quicker than me, but she was very patient and very helpful. I quickly fell in love with fried and steamed dumplings, chicken fried rice, papaya milk, and jinju naicha, of course, bubble tea. I soon knew every shortcut and back road within the city and discovered many cool little businesses and restaurants hidden within Kaohsiung. I was loving all this adventure.
Now, when we first went to Taiwan, we didn't go for missions. We just went for a job. But God had other purposes for us. Many teachers from a missionary school attended the same English church as we did. And one of them convinced me that I should apply to teach at their school. I sent in an application and was called in for an interview. Eventually, the school offered me a position teaching grade 2. But there was a catch. They wanted me to sign a 2-year contract. At this point in time, I was not in love with Taiwan. I was burying Taiwan. I had some good times, but I missed my family, and all I really wanted to do was go home and have a steak. The food was a bit of a problem for me at first. However, I knew this was where God wanted us. Chad knew this was where God wanted us. It's also where he wanted to be. But he let me wrestle it out with God, and I really did have to wrestle that out with God. I remember we'd be driving on the scooter, I'd be sitting behind him, and I'd start thinking about signing that contract, and I'd just start bawling. And he'd know I was crying because he could feel me like shaking in the background. And he'd stop, he's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I don't want to stay here. So it was a real struggle for me. But the school needed an answer. So after about a week, I finally gave in, and I signed the contract. And it was like this immediate sense of peace just fell over me. And I started seeing Taiwan in a different light. I started seeing the good in it. I started enjoying some of the new foods, and I started to identify some of the smells, which really helped me out a lot. Stinky tofu wasn't so bad once I knew what it was. So it was like God was rewarding my obedience with this sense of peace that he gave me.
In order for Danielle to teach in Taiwan at that school, we needed to be affiliated with a mission organization that was active in Taiwan at the time. So we teamed up with a group named Team Expansion. We chose them simply because we liked the work that they were doing. We knew the other members well, and we had a lot of respect for them and the work that they were doing. We began attending one of their church plants in Kaohsiung, and I helped out with their youth group every second Friday, which also helped me use the little Chinese that I was learning at the time. I was now able to reflect back and see how God was working in my life. Philippians 2:13 says, "For it is God who is at work in you, to will and to act to fulfill his good purpose." I believe that God gave me a strong desire for adventure, which he used to bring me to Taiwan, to learn Chinese, and now to build relationships with Taiwanese youth and share the love of Jesus with them. It was starting to all come together. Often it isn't until we go through a season in our life that we are able to reflect back, and we're able to see God's leading and directing hand in our lives during that period of time or through that specific circumstance.
The second year in Taiwan was a time of wonderful spiritual growth in our lives. I truly believe that God puts people in the mission field not just for those who they're serving, but for themselves as well. I was so blessed through prayer meetings with our mission organization, with daily prayer at my school, and with Bible studies that we were leading. When you have the privilege of seeing God work in other people's lives, it definitely strengthens your own faith. As I mentioned, one of our ministries we enjoyed doing together was an English Bible study at a university campus in Kaohsiung. Many students wanted to improve their English skills, so they would attend the Bible study. They didn't really come for the Bible, they came for the English, but that's okay. We made it fun with singing and games, and we made it educational by teaching vocabulary and with reading skills, but everything tied into the Bible lesson. People who came for the English began coming to hear about God's Word. We started off with about 20 people, and by the end of the year, we ended up with about 70 people attending our classes. Several people were baptized, and others were seriously seeking God. Today, we see some of these old university students on Facebook, and we can see how they are serving God now in their lives. Even though the school I worked at was a missionary school, only about 30% of the kids were missionary kids. The rest of the kids came from business families, people who were there for work, or from Taiwanese families. About 50% of our kids came from Buddhist families. Their families chose to put them in this school because of the high educational standards. But they told their kids, just kind of ignore that Christian part. We're Buddhist. Don't pay any attention to that. Well, this is nearly impossible in the type of school that I taught in. We had Bible class every day, but more than that, Christ encompassed everything we did. Teachers modeled their relationship with Christ to the students, and we taught them how to see the world through a biblical worldview. Because of this, many students were interested in making a commitment to Christ. And I actually had 4 students, one of them here, Winnie, wanted to be baptized. And amazingly, their parents allowed them to be baptized. It was just such an encouraging, amazing thing to be a part of. There were other students who wanted to be baptized, but their parents wouldn't allow it. So some of them I'm Facebook friends with now, and I can see that they're still living their lives for Christ. Others have not, but we know that the seed was planted there.
At this time, I was teaching English classes at a junior and senior high school in Kaohsiung. After my second year of teaching English, I found myself not enjoying it as much as I thought I would, or as much as I did when I first started. I was finding certain aspects of my job extremely challenging and found myself asking God, is my time here up? What else do you have in store for me? I had a very good relationship with Danielle's principal, a man by the name of Bob Walter. I was in a small group Bible study with Bob at the time and was sharing my feelings one day as he was driving me home. He knew exactly how I was feeling, as he had experienced the same feeling in a similar situation a few years earlier. Bob was very encouraging and insightful, and I know that God used him to help direct me towards getting a degree in education. My work environment at that time was a lot different than Danielle's. Many of the English teachers that I worked with were into the partying scene and often went out every evening after work. And they were also using their Chinese, but to impress the Taiwanese ladies. Although my lifestyle and belief system was quite different, I knew God put them in my life. We would often have a house full of English teachers at our house during special occasions like Thanksgiving and Christmas. I remember one Christmas, our church hosted a Christmas dinner and encouraged us to bring our friends. We mentioned this to our co-workers and were completely surprised when they showed interest. We met our friends that Sunday afternoon and walked into church, filling up 2 pews. For many of them, it was a first-time experience. It was neat seeing them engaging in conversation with other church members after the service and hearing them ask questions and just having a good time. I soon realized that the mission field God gave me for that time was not only my Buddhist Taiwanese friends, but also the people I worked with, other foreigners.
One perk in being affiliated with the mission organization was being invited to their holiday gatherings. Our second year in Taiwan, we went with an organization to their weekend Thanksgiving get-together. It was held at an orphanage in northeastern Taiwan that was run by some of the missionaries. It was there that God really cemented my desire to adopt. Adoption was an idea we had thrown around, but had never really seriously talked about. While there, I fell in love with a little baby girl named Joy, and the bottom picture is of me holding her. She is my side cook the whole time we were there, and if she hadn't been matched with an adoptive family already, I probably would have tried to take her home.
She's not lying.
I might have shed a few tears over her when we left. It couldn't happen, but the seed of adoption had been planted. After several years in Taiwan, Chad and I decided we wanted to start a family. We were a bit naive and expected that we would get pregnant right away. After 6 months, when I still wasn't pregnant, I felt discouraged. After 2 years, I was panicked. I remember crying and praying to God, asking him to show me what unconfessed sin I had in my life that was causing him to stop me from conceiving, or what past sin I had committed that I was being punished for. I just couldn't figure it out. And I thought, if I could figure this out, then God would surely heal me, and I would be fertile, and I would get pregnant. So I looked at it as a punishment instead of God's will for my life at that time, as his perfect plan and timing for my life. One night, I was reading the story of Hannah that Dad read. And it wasn't the first time I had read that story by any means, but it was the first time that God spoke to me through that story. When I read the part about Hannah conceiving and giving birth to a son, I felt God speaking to my heart. It was like he told me that I was going to have a child, that he would bless me with a child. And I held on to that as a promise. After some time, I started to focus on adoption. I wanted a baby, and to me, it didn't matter if I grew in my womb or somebody else's womb. Chad wasn't opposed to adoption, but he wanted us to have a child first and then look into adoption. Several times that year, I heard about children who were up for adoption for some reason. And I would come home from school, and I would tell him all about this child and how we could make this meeting, and we could go see them, and it would be perfect, and we could adopt them. And each time he completely freaked out. And he told me no, and that was the end of that. Once I even went so far as to set up a meeting. I came home from school, and I said, hey, we have this meeting with this little 2-year-old girl. For some reason, her family can't take care of her anymore, and we're going to go see her tonight, and maybe we can adopt her. Well, he made me pick up the phone and call and cancel that meeting. He just wasn't ready. So I waited, and I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed.
I knew that we were ready to have children, and I was starting to look forward to a life with children. It's not that I was against having or against adoption, but we've been praying for children, and I just wanted to give God time to respond to our requests.
2 years.
I'm not sure why I became so nervous when Danielle would start talking about adoption. Maybe because it often led to, this baby is adoptable and it needs a family. I think we should go see this baby tonight. My insides would instantly knot up, and I could picture us going to see this baby and 3 hours later coming back with this baby.
Chad and I eventually went to a fertility clinic, and we were told that it would be very difficult for us to have children. I finally convinced Chad to fill out the adoption paperwork, and we called the orphanage and told them our situation, and they told us to send our paperwork in. In the meantime, I started on fertility medicine. It was an incredibly stressful time in our lives. I had severe side effects to the medication, mainly behavioral ones.
It was very scary.
Slightly psychotic. So the stress of being on the medication combined with waiting each month to see if I was pregnant and then being disappointed at the end of the month left me really emotionally drained and on edge. And it seemed at that time everyone I knew was getting pregnant. Many nights I went to bed crying my heart out, why not me, God? And I still believed that promise that God had given me, but it just seemed so far away. About 4 months after we started fertility medication, the doctor told us he would have to double the dosage. Because of the severe side effects I had from the medication and Chad's fear that I would kill him while on it, we decided to give up on this route. At about the same time, we kept on hearing about how the orphanage had this huge influx of babies and that they didn't have enough adoptive families. And we were wondering why they weren't calling us. So I thought we should call the orphanage and talk to them. But Chad said that if God wanted us to have a baby, then God would work everything out in his time and we shouldn't have to do anything. I thought that God gave us brains and he gave us a phone and we should use both of them. He wasn't ready though, so I kept on praying. One day, I was at a parent advisory meeting at school when one of the missionary ladies, who was also a friend of ours, came in carrying a little 4-day-old baby girl in a car seat. After the meeting, she stayed back to talk to me, and she told me that she had just picked up the baby from the hospital, from her birth mother, and that as soon as she was old enough, in about a month, they would be bringing her up to the orphanage. She also told me that the baby hadn't been assigned to anyone yet. She knew Chad and I wanted to adopt, So she suggested we bring the baby over to my apartment so Chad could see her. Yeah. I told her I didn't think Chad would like me to just show up with a baby. So I called him first.
So I remember being at home one afternoon and receiving a phone call from Danielle. I could tell that something was going on by her voice. She told me about the baby and how she hadn't been placed with the family yet. Wasn't the first time I heard this. This time, though, when she said it, something was different. I actually felt excited and not the sweaty fear and the tingling that I used to get. I was curious about her and actually wanted to meet her. So Danielle brought her home, and we sat down together, and first thing we just all three of us got together and we just prayed. We prayed for the baby. We prayed that God would show us if this was the child he had for us. And as we prayed, we both felt strongly that she was to be our child. We prayed for her and asked God to show us what to do. When our friend came back to pick her up, we asked her what she thought our next steps should be. And she advised us that we should contact the orphanage.
Chad finally agreed that I could pick up the phone and make that call. So that night we called the orphanage. We told them we had just met this baby and that we would like to adopt her. Well, they informed us that you don't just say, "Hey, I saw a baby, we want that one." So what am I going to say? So they did tell us, also they informed us that they didn't have our application. They said they remember receiving it, but it wasn't on file. So all this time when they weren't calling us and we thought they had our application, it wasn't there. So they told us that we needed to resend our application in. So that involved financial statements, statements showing that we had work. We needed references. So within 2 days, we had all that. Our references came from Canada and Taiwan. It was all there. And they also told us that they would pray about this baby and all the other babies they had and decide where God thought they were leading us, which baby they thought they were leading us to. At the same time, I was involved in a Bethmore Bible study called Believing God. As part of the Bible study, we were asked to pray about what our promised land was. What is it that God wanted to promise us? And I felt like God told me my promised land was a baby, specifically this baby, Ian. However, I wavered. As I read back through my journal at that time, I can see the struggle I was having. Did God really promise this to me, or was I just wanting it so bad that I was making it up? Had God really spoken to us? How could I know? Could I believe that this promise is really for me? Could I really believe that God wanted to do this for me? I remember praying this verse from Mark 9:24. I do believe. Help me overcome my disbelief. All of our paperwork... Oh, I already said this. Getting ahead of myself. So when our paperwork got to the orphanage, we talked to them again, and they were pretty non-committal. They told us they couldn't guarantee that we would be able to adopt Ian, and even if it was her that they placed us with, that it could take up to 7 or 8 months. So in the meantime, we were seeing her almost every day because this missionary later came to bring her kids to school. So when I would see her, I had these warring emotions. I wanted to hold her all I could, but I didn't want to get too attached to her just in case. I ended up holding her a lot, though. But it was very nerve-wracking, and I held on to this verse from Hebrews 11, verse 1. It says, "Now faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see." Now, I think that this really is talking about God and his salvation. We don't see him. We don't see his work, but we believe in it anyways. But I took it further to mean the promise that God had given me. I felt sure that he had given me the promise of this child. And even though it seemed like nothing on earth was moving to make this happen, that even though I couldn't see how God was working, that I needed to believe that he would do what he had promised he would do.
2 weeks after we first saw Ian, on a Wednesday evening, we got a phone call from our friend telling us that the orphanage was allowing us to adopt Kaylin. However, we couldn't take her home until her birth mother signed the final papers. She was scheduled to sign them in 2 days on a Friday. We were ecstatic and couldn't wait until Friday. The adoption wouldn't take place then, but in 2 days we'd become her legal guardians and we'd be able to start the adoption process. Danielle talked to her principal, and he said that he would give her 6 weeks off of work. She had 2 days to plan her subs and to shop for all the things that we'd need for a baby. It was a very busy 2 days.
God truly had made me the promise of a child and had brought me into this promised land. He had blessed me with infertility in order to bless me with this beautiful baby girl. Had I had a child when I wanted to, we wouldn't have been led to the path to adoption at the right time to meet Kaylin. Had I dug in my heels and said no to Taiwan, I never would have been to this place and time. God's perfect plan and perfect timing were revealed to us, and all those years of sorrow seemed foolish. Why had I not trusted that God had a good plan for my life? On Friday, we picked up our baby girl, Ayan. We named her Kaylin. We immediately fell in love with her. I never imagined I could love anyone like I loved her. Kaylin was such a blessing in our lives that we knew we wanted to have more children. One day, about 6 months before we moved back to Canada, I was shopping with a friend in Costco, and we were talking about my desire to have more kids. She looked at me and she said, "You know, Danielle, I think you're going to leave Taiwan pregnant." As soon as she said that, we got goosebumps all over. The hair on the back of our neck stood up, and we just had this electrified feeling. And we kind of looked at each other, and she said, "Did you feel that?" I said, "Yeah." It was like God's Holy Spirit just totally confirmed that the words she said it was almost like she had spoken a prophecy over me. It was an amazing experience that I had never had before. Well, sure enough, 6 months later, I arrived back in Canada. A week later, I took a pregnancy test. I took 2 more that week. All 3 of them were positive, and I was pregnant.
Unfortunately, Danielle miscarried, but we were so elated because God's promise had held true, and we were sure that she could get pregnant again. Sure enough, 3 months later, she was pregnant again, this time with Maya. As you all know, Maya was born with Down syndrome. While Danielle was pregnant, we knew there was a chance Maya could have Down syndrome. We didn't find out for sure, though, until the genetic testing came back 2 weeks after she was born. When we found out, we sat down together and we cried. We loved our baby, but we didn't know what this meant for her life, maybe for our life. When we saw people with Down syndrome, we noticed the disability, how they were different, what they weren't able to do. Hearing that she might not walk until she's 3, 4, maybe 5, or that she might not be able to communicate clearly was devastating for us. We grieved for the child we thought we had, but we didn't. However, as time went on, we realized that she was more like us than different. We were excited about her every milestone, the same as we had been with Kaylin's. It didn't matter that they came a little later than other kids. They came, and she was learning, and she was growing.
Instead of having a child with a disability, we just had this really loving, sweet little girl who completely stole our hearts. Now, looking at Maya, we've decided we wouldn't want to change her. Yes, she's incredibly stubborn, and we know that she'll struggle in school. She'll need lots of speech therapy, and she won't ever be as independent as Kaylin will be. But she has this incredible joy for life, a crazy adventurous spirit, and a huge capacity to love. If we took away the Down syndrome, we would change who she was, and we don't want that. We've been so fortunate that God has opened up our eyes to the incredible blessing she is. We also know that according to Psalm 139, that he created her. He knit her together in my womb. And God tells us that all his works are good, and all his gifts are good. That means that Maya, even though one of her chromosomes is a bit different, is made perfectly, and she is the perfect gift for our family. Well, about a year and a half ago, Chad and I decided that we wanted to look into adoption again. The more we prayed about it, the more we felt led to adopt a child with Down syndrome. Because we had Maya, we knew Down syndrome wasn't the scary thing that we once thought it was. One day, while I was at a mom's prayer group, I shared with them our desire to adopt again. And I asked them to pray with us about whether or not we should adopt a child with Down syndrome. After praying in the meeting, Kathy Corral came up to me and she said, "I know the child for you." I said, "Okay." And she told us about this little 3-year-old boy who was living with a foster mom who's a missionary in China. and he has Down syndrome. Kathy was actually there when he was born, and she took care of him the first few months of his life. Well, that night, I told Chad about him, and as we prayed, we both felt this was an answer to our prayers. This was the direction God wanted us to take. And several things happened after that to confirm that.
Yeah, actually, that was a neat part of the story. A lot of the confirmation when we started having doubt, God was using people in our life to reaffirm the path that we were on was where he wanted us to be. And that is so encouraging in our life when you're taking this leap of faith. So where are we today? We're in the process of trying to adopt this little boy named Caleb. It's a bit of a complicated process, but we know that if this is the little boy that God has for us, then God will open up all the doors that need to be opened and bring him into our home in the right time. If he's not, then we believe God's brought us down this road for another reason. Because of our past experience, we know without a shadow of a doubt that when God wills something for our lives, he brings it to completion, no matter whether or not we can see how he is working.
Now, some people say things like, oh, you're such good people. You adopt children, and now you want to adopt this child with Down syndrome. You're so wonderful. Well, we don't think we're bad people, but we're not that special or that great. We definitely have our faults. There are things about my personality that I would like to improve on. And as a mother, there are some days that I kind of lose it. I'm sure I'm not the only one here that does that. But we feel that we've been incredibly blessed by our children and by the path that God has taken us on. It's not the one that we expected, but we feel that it's perfect for us. And we find it funny that people think Kaylin's the lucky one. We feel like we're the lucky ones because God has blessed us with her. So what have we learned? We've learned that God's plans are not always our plans. God's timing is not always our timing. But we have learned that God is faithful to fulfill his promises to us. He is powerful to act on our behalf, and his gifts are always good. So, thank you for letting us share this part of our journey with you.